How do you make one of the best modern movies in just 19 days? And how does a frustrated drummer end up winning 3 Oscars? The answer comes down to a mix of passion and extreme commitment. Something you don't just witness on screen, but something that defined everything happening behind the scenes. Today we're diving into the behind-the-scenes story of Whiplash, a movie that was rejected, trimmed down, and completely underestimated. We're going to meet a first-time director who convinced a studio with a homemade short, an actor who cracked his ribs in the middle of a scene, and a set where people were literally bleeding. And all of that just to tell the story of a kid who simply wanted to play the drums well. Get ready, because this isn't just a story about a movie. It's a story about obsession, sacrifice, and rhythm. A lot of rhythm. The first person to fall into the rhythm wasn't the lead in Whiplash. It was the director, Damien Chazelle. Born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1985, Chazelle grew up in a home where music and movies were just part of daily life. His dad was a surgeon who also played piano, and his mom was a teacher. From an early age, he developed a passion that would shape everything he did: music. In high school, Chazelle dreamed of becoming a jazz drummer. He practiced for hours, sometimes until his hands were torn up. But the competitive, demanding, and often unforgiving environment of music programs eventually crushed that dream. Just like many of the characters he'd later create, he never felt like he was good enough. That frustration stayed with him. That failure pushed him toward filmmaking, another obsession he'd been nurturing since he was a kid. He went to Harvard, wrote a few scripts, and eventually directed his first feature, Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, a black and white musical that blended jazz with an indie romantic tone. It was well received at a few festivals, but it never found distribution and mostly went unnoticed. Chazelle suddenly found himself stuck. He had the training, he had the ideas, but he still didn't have a place in the industry. And in the middle of that uncertainty, he started writing about what he understood best: the fear of failure, the pressure to stand out, and the obsession with being the best no matter the cost. That's where the script for Whiplash was born. And from there, it wouldn't be long before he arrived at the chaotic 19-day production that would change his career forever. But before any of that could happen, he had to get through the hardest part: convincing someone that his idea could actually work. Chazelle didn't just want to tell a story about music. He wanted to show the obsession, the pressure, and the sacrifice behind chasing perfection. Drawing from his own experience playing drums in his school band, he poured into Whiplash that world of relentless demands, where every note and every hit could make the difference between success and failure. But Hollywood wasn't ready for that story. When he submitted the script, producers turned it down over and over, until Blumhouse stepped in, the same company behind Paranormal Activity, The Purge, and other breakout projects from independent voices. At the time, they were beginning to invest in more director-driven films, but with one condition: they needed proof that the idea worked and was worth the gamble. The solution was drastic but pretty simple. Chazelle had to turn one scene from the script into a short. One scene meant one chance to convince them. So he chose the most intense moment he had: the first real confrontation between young Andrew, played by Miles Teller in the feature, and the intimidating Fletcher, also played by J.K. Simmons in the short. With a tiny budget and only 3 days to work, they filmed the short in a neighborhood school. Chazelle directed every second with one constant fear: if he didn't win over the investors, the project would die right there. Yelling, sweat, insults, cymbals flying. That scene needed to shake even the most stubborn executives in Hollywood. And it did. When the short screened at the Sundance Film Festival, the room erupted in applause. Blumhouse gave the feature green light, and an unexpected ally appeared: Sony Pictures Classics, stepping in as the distributor. Chazelle finally had his chance. Now he just needed to make it real. But Blumhouse added one condition: he had to do it with a bare-bones budget, no big-name actors, and exactly 19 days of production. With Blumhouse and Sony Pictures Classics on board, Whiplash was finally moving forward as a feature. But the excitement didn't last long. The approved budget was only $3 million. To put that in perspective, that's less than what a single day of production costs on a major Hollywood movie. And Whiplash had to be made entirely with that amount. That forced Chazelle to cut the schedule down to the bare minimum. In total, 19 days of production, not one more. Chazelle was finally going to direct his own story, but now he had to make it with almost surgical precision. There was no room for mistakes, no discarded scenes, no long strings of retakes, no last-minute changes. Timing on set had to be exact. Every frame needed to be planned, and every actor had to be ready. The pressure to finish Whiplash on time was almost worse than having the film's villain as your actual music teacher. So how did he pull it off? Let's go through the conditions needed to make this movie in 19 days. To kick things off, the production team worked at full speed while the cast rehearsed non-stop. There wouldn't be dressing rooms. They planned to cover 7 or 8 script pages a day. which is wild even for independent films, and breaks weren't really an option. That's how the production started in an old Los Angeles school that was about to be demolished. That gave them the freedom to use different parts of the building as if they were completely different locations. With small changes in lighting, set dressing, and camera angles, Chazelle could make the same hallway look like 3 separate places. What would have been a problem for most productions turned into an advantage here. Fewer moves, fewer permits, and far less wasted time. Everything unfolded inside that tiny ecosystem, as if the whole movie were trapped in a single universe. Closed, oppressive, suffocating, mirroring the protagonist's state of mind. Chazelle knew he didn't have time, money, or room for mistakes. So he showed up on set with something a lot of directors still underestimate, an extremely detailed storyboard. Every frame in Whiplash was drawn by hand, numbered, organized, and mentally rehearsed weeks before a single camera rolled. Chazelle didn't just have thorough storyboards, he had a near-surgical understanding of the film's structure. He knew which frame matched which line, how long each reaction needed to last, and even which piece of music would overlap with which moment. It was like he had already edited the entire movie in his head. And there was a reason behind that level of obsession. He couldn't afford to improvise. Every creative decision was shaped by the schedule. If a take didn't work after 3 tries, they moved on. Chazelle would rush in, giving notes almost without stopping to breathe, reciting the shots from memory. Some crew members said he seemed more like a musician than a filmmaker, and you can feel that in the movie. The rhythm isn't just in Andrew's drumming. It's in the editing. You only need a few moments to notice how every hit lines up with a precise visual choice. There isn't a single extra second. Every action follows an invisible score. But the most striking part wasn't the speed, it was the intensity. In most films, a scene might allow for different interpretations. In Whiplash, every take demanded a level of commitment that bordered on unhinged. That set was all sweat, yelling, and blood, and every bit of it was real, both behind and in front of the camera. They were making a story about obsession. And from day one, the production felt exactly like that. And it wasn't just because of the director. On the other side of the camera, there was an actor who understood the script's intensity perfectly and decided to push it as far as he could. When he walked onto set shaved, bald, built, dressed in black, and with that sniper-like stare, the crew knew the movie had just shifted into a completely different tone. Writing a character like Fletcher is one thing. Having him in front of the camera is something completely different. J.K. Simmons, who until then was mostly known for supporting roles, dove into the part like his life depended on it. He yelled without holding back. He improvised new insults in every take, and the most surprising part, he didn't want to rehearse. He preferred the tension to be real, for that first outburst to hit Andrew Neiman, played by Miles Teller, with full force. At first, Chazelle was terrified because he needed to stick to the schedule down to the minute, but Simmons wasn't going to slip. In many of those raw moments where Fletcher gets inches from Andrew's face and crushes him with words, the fear you see in Teller's eyes is real. The tension between the characters is palpable, because it existed off camera too. Teller often had no idea what was coming next. Simmons would get too close. He'd slam objects, he'd throw chairs. All of it actually happened. The fear in Teller's eyes wasn't always acting. He never really knew what was coming, or whether a cymbal hit was in the script or just an accident. And, of course, there were accidents. During the production, Teller injured his hand from hitting the drums with too much force. The blood you see on the drumheads isn't an effect, it's real. In another moment, Simmons fractured 2 ribs after slamming into a sound wall just off camera. But he kept working as if nothing had happened. There was no time to lose. That level of intensity wasn't just acting, it matched the logic of the film. If Andrew was willing to bleed to be the best, the production had to hurt a little too. To get that authenticity, Miles went through weeks of intense training. It wasn't just about playing the pieces. He had to master specific jazz techniques, a demanding and complex style. His coach was Nate Lang, a professional drummer who not only worked behind the scenes, but also appears in the film as one of the band members. But even with Teller's effort, some of the more technically challenging shots were performed by a double. The production was full of moments that pushed everyone to the edge. One of the toughest scenes was the car crash, filmed using 3 different setups. One with Miles Teller driving, another with a green screen, and a third with a stunt double inside an overturned car. They only attempted the stunt once. The vehicle was too damaged to repeat it. The plan had to work on the first try, and it did. That same intensity carried into the final sequence, a cathartic drum solo that Teller improvised for the most part. To capture all that energy and raw emotion, Chazelle used 3 cameras at the same time, looking for every drop of sweat, every small movement, and every note loaded with pain. Of course, spending entire days running on adrenaline, anxiety, and stress wasn't going to come without consequences. To give you an idea, Chazelle was so exhausted and so locked into the film that he got into a car accident during the third week of production. He was dazed, his neck had to be braced, and his nerves were shot. The producers told him to stop and begged him to take a few days off, but Chazelle refused. He was terrified that if he missed even a single day, the entire movie would fall apart. They'd already come too far. He went back to set with his body wrecked, mentally drained, and one idea running through his head: finish Whiplash no matter what, even if he had to drag himself to the last shot. While the cast was bleeding and the director was barely sleeping after surviving a car accident, another part of Whiplash was coming together, off-set. Damien Chazelle knew the post-production would be a race against time, but the way he tried to win that race was just as extreme. He started assembling the movie while they were still filming it. The editor was Tom Cross, experienced but still far from the recognition he'd earn later. His job was clear and brutal. Every frame filmed that day had to be downloaded and cut in parallel. No waiting months. Whatever was filmed today had to start taking shape tomorrow. That allowed for one crucial advantage: catching continuity issues, missing reactions, or scenes that weren't working, and if there was any time left, trying to redo them the next day. But of course, there was almost never any time. Whiplash has more than 1,500 cuts. Every reaction, every glance, every hit was edited like part of a visual score. Later on, Cross would win a well-deserved Oscar for that work. When production wrapped, no one was entirely sure what they'd made. They'd bled, collapsed, yelled, barely slept, and survived a schedule that felt like a trap. But Whiplash was finished. The movie premiered at the 2014 Sundance Film Festival. The theater was full, but no one really knew what to expect. When the credits ended, there was silence. And then, a standing ovation. Whiplash won the Grand Jury Prize. Then it hit commercial theaters, and what seemed like a small festival oddity turned into a global phenomenon. It made more than $50 million worldwide on a budget that didn't even reach $4 million. But that wasn't its biggest win. The film earned 5 Oscar nominations and ended up taking home 3. Best Editing, Best Sound, and Best Supporting Actor for J.K. Simmons, who solidified himself as a force with one of the most intense performances in modern cinema. From that moment on, Damien Chazelle's career took off without slowing down. In 2017, at just 32 years old, he became the youngest filmmaker to win the Oscar for Best Director thanks to La La Land, solidifying his place in Hollywood as an exceptional talent. Still, for many people, Whiplash remains his rawest and most powerful work because it wasn't just a great movie, it was a feat. A film born from rejection, made under pressure, and edited as if every cut were a final note. A story about obsession, but also about blind faith in a vision. And as Fletcher famously said, there are no 2 words in the English language more harmful than good job. Because sometimes, to make history, you have to break your hands, or your soul. Calling Five Nights at Freddy's just a horror game doesn't really work. In less than a decade, a small indie project made by one guy turned into one of the biggest pop culture forces of the last 10 years.